Steph,
Leah,
Jess.
is this line secure?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Secure Line. I'm Steph Carvin, and I'm here joined with Jess Davis, and we are going to go through the budget. And let me say, this is like nerd Super Bowl for us, right? This is kind of one of the things I like to really go through and see what it says about national security, even though national security very seldom makes the headlines when it comes to budget.
Yeah, and I think this is a thing that's so fun for us is that it gets kind of wonky really fast. And it's the kind of stuff that the regular news media isn't really going to cover. So we're going to try to really pull out those NatSec pieces from the budget, the things that you're probably not going to see on the CBC or the Globe and Mail. So let's get to it, Steph. Why don't you start by telling me a little bit about your reflections on what you found in the budget?
Well, the other thing I was just going to say just before we start is by national security, I mean things that deal with terrorism, espionage, foreign interference, Section 2 of the CSIS Act kind of stuff. If you are interested in the more defense side stuff, I would really encourage people to read Phil Lagasse's Substack. He goes through this. He knows this inside out, upside down, and backwards. His Substack's called Debating Canadian Defense. It's really good. I will note that there is $84 billion of spending, and that does not include subs, right? Because we're probably not going to get the subs until at least 2030. So apparently this is some kind of cash only budget. The other, I feel like I should give a caveat here that also I don't understand money. You do. So you can correct me where I'm wrong. But that defense spending is going to include things like 25% pay, $18 billion towards getting things like unmanned aerial vehicles, precision strike capabilities, and things like that pretty quickly. But there's still a lot we don't actually know, but presumably we'll be finding out in the next couple of months and years going forward.
Yeah, I think it's really safe to say that they're making it rain in defense.
Yes.
Well, technically, actually, specifically the Canadian Armed Forces, because
Right.
national defense is actually getting a budget cut. So it's very specific for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah, that's an important point to make.
Yeah, so the bureaucracy around it is going to get trimmed like every other bureaucracy in Ottawa. Well, most other bureaucracies in Ottawa, but Canadian Armed Forces making it rain.
Yeah, it's apparently the largest injection of cash since the 1950s. So have fun with that, guys and girls and everyone else. Yeah. So my takeaways from this is, if we do a bottom line up front, I would say that this budget promised to be transformative and, generational and things like that. When it comes to national security, it's just not, right? It does seem to be doubling down for the most part on the institutions that we have. There is one big exception, which is this new financial crimes agency, which I definitely are hoping you're going to go to town on the next few minutes of the podcast. But in reality, it's a budget that is doubling down on, for example, the RCMP, right? How many the RCMP I looked appears 32 times in this budget, and one of those includes funding for the RCMP Heritage Museum in Regina. So it got to that level. And I suppose, I guess my takeaway, and I'll put my cards on the table right now, is that I really do feel like the year 2025, facing these new threats, these new realities that are very much talked about in this budget, this would have been a time to maybe rethink some of the way that we do national security in this country. And that doesn't seem to be coming. Now, I'll put a caveat on that and a pin in it maybe, because we do know there's a national security strategy coming, the long promised national security strategy.
Praise
It's
be.
it's like the Great Pumpkin, and we just said Halloween. It's like the Great Pumpkin, and never really shows up. So yeah, so I would say, we can talk about the nitty gritty, but I would say that it largely is to me, from a national security perspective, this is a budget that largely maintains the status quo in some places and heavily cuts in others.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I think we've been hearing all summer about austerity, austerity, austerity. And then I look at this budget and I don't see austerity, which I think is actually good. I think that's the right choice in this climate. I don't think that we're in a trade war with the United States and our economy is teetering on the brink, that time is to actually cut. I think it's time to make investments and stuff. And I did see the projections on the deficit that I think we're going to be at around 2.5% of GDP, which is actually way lower than I think it was the 2021 pandemic deficit that was 14% or something. listeners need to fact check my numbers because I'm just like really
high.
but it was super high. And so
Is
it's
that because
actually,
there was no GDP during the pandemic?
there might have been something about that, and just like the rollout of all of the programs that had to happen at that time. So I was really happy to see like not so much as austerity here, although of course the public service is going to be hit pretty hard. We have yet to see how that's going to shake out. But I think I agree with you. There's not really a generational change here. There's no foreign intelligence agency, which
I know.
would have been
I think that dream
amazing.
is dead. We'll have to do a
I
separate
mean,
pod on that. If we do some kind of holiday pod on what's for our tree, but really a lump of coal. I think.
yeah, that's a good flag for our listeners. We are planning to do a Christmas pod. We'll talk about all the things we got right and wrong during the year, and just
Maybe we should
generally,
call it a Festivus pod.
because I used to have that Festivus party, right? So it's
pretty good.
But anyways, back to the budget.
Yeah, back to the budget. And to be fair, like, and we're prefacing all of this, I think one of the things is that we do have to remember this is a survive Trump budget. This was not going to be a let's make a budget of things that makes, Steph Carvin and Jess Davis happy. Unfortunately, I think it's a great plan for a budget, but, there'd also be like free ponies for everybody. But you did get a kind of pony. And how are you feeling about that pony, Jeff?
Oh, that pony. It's really, so we're talking about the Canadian Financial Crimes Agency here. And this is really like the ghost of budgets past. Like this is the thing that keeps coming back. So this was originally in the Liberal platform in 2021. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. In 2022, the government actually announced plans to create a new enforcement agency. So they specified that this wasn't just going to be like a policy center, it was going to be actually an enforcement body. And by fall 2023, we were supposed to have a decision about what this would look like specifically in the fall economic update. Cricket. And then by fall 2024, it was missing entirely from the fall economic statement. But of course, that's when everything exploded in the Freeland budget. But it's back. The Financial Crimes Agency is back. So it's going to be Canada's lead enforcement agency on complex financial crimes, money laundering, online financial scams.
And can you just maybe explain to our listeners who aren't as, invested in this as perhaps we are, and you are in particular, what is it? What is a financial crimes agency? Like, what is the purpose of it, and why is it being suggested?
Isn't that a can of worms? So the reason why the Financial Crimes Agency is being suggested is because Canada has been really, really bad at investigating and prosecuting financial crimes across the board, but specifically like on the money laundering front. And I mean, I think I've said many times about what the terrorist financing numbers look like. Really, these kinds of investigations are lengthy, complex, and resource intensive. And the RCMP has currently the lead on this, particularly as it relates to serious organized crime, serious money laundering. But the way that the RCMP is structured is such that it continuously pulls resources away from these kinds of investigations. So we've talked before about how we have the federal policing mandate for the RCMP and the contract policing mandate of the RCMP. They also have other functions as well, but we'll just stick with this simplistic interpretation for now. And contract policing is the policing that's happening in the provinces and local municipalities. And this is prioritized within the RCMP budget. They have to provide RCMP members to do that policing function. So whenever there's a shortage across the organization, everything flows to contract policing.
And it's also my understanding, like based on reading some of the reports about this, that there's financial incentives for people to get into the contract policing because it's easier to get promotions, easier to get to higher levels. Like, so it's not.
Well, there's just way more. There's just way more opportunities. There's just so many different things that are happening there. Like it's a big organization.
And there's they call it contract policing because there's literal contracts that have to be fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly.
It's prioritized.
Yeah, and it comes up for renewal every 10 years. I think we're actually negotiating it right now, or it will be negotiated in a couple of years. So all of that to say is that that's pulling resources from federal policing. And within federal policing, there's this financial crimes policing function. But really, federal policing tends to pull from that when their resources are pulled to contract policing because those investigations are lengthy, complex, difficult to sustain. You tend to not get the splashy sort of headlines from them. And honestly, and one of the things that we have to be honest about is that the RCMP needs to prioritize immediate threat to life. And I preface that with immediate because my view is that all of the things that the RCMP is investigating, including financial crimes, have a threat to life component. But they are investigating, they have to prioritize immediate threat to life. So like the bombs that are going to go off. All this to say, financial crimes gets the short shrift every single time. So the Financial Crimes Agency is meant to protect those resources. I think this is probably the time for me to say that this is not the premier solution that the government is saying that it is.
I'm shocked.
They're saying that it's,
Face.
yeah, exactly. They're saying that this is the best in class sort of solution. It's the
According
best.
to the RCMP, it is.
It's the best solution that we have when no one's willing to tackle RCMP reform.
Right. Kind of the original sin of Canadian national security at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it has really become the third rail of national security at this point as well. Like, nobody's willing to touch this thing. And I say that because it makes no sense whatsoever to have a financial crimes agency, an investigative enforcement agency that is separate from the RCMP. Because all of the underlying offenses of these crimes that they are going to be investigating are going to be investigated by the RCMP. Serious organized crime is going to be investigated by the RCMP. Serious, sanctions evasion, all of these kinds of things is going to live with the RCMP. So now we've got this new financial crimes agency that's going to have lead on the financial components of all of these crimes, which is going to need to coordinate the heck out of itself with the RCMP on these investigations. So it's adding a layer of complexity to this that I think is really not going to result in quick wins, but it is the best solution that we have because no one's willing to actually tackle this whole bifurcated mandate of the RCMP.
So let me ask you this then. So this financial crimes agency, first of all, how much has been budgeted towards it?
We don't know.
What?
Oh, we're going to get that in the spring. We're going to find out more about that.
Okay.
We don't know. We have no idea how much this is going to cost.
That's a flex.
They're going to stand it up by the spring of 2026.
Okay. That's
in 4 months.
Okay. Maybe they've already started?
Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of policy work ongoing for the last 4 years around this. So it's not like, I think it's the Department of Finance leading on this currently. It's been public safety now. I think it's back to finance. It's not like there's no policy work done. And so it's very possible that they actually have legislation ready to be tabled to stand up this agency.
They're going to pass this legislation in 4 months?
Maybe. Who knows? I think, I'm just talking about what the realm of the possible is. Okay. So it's possible that legislation could be tabled. Who knows when it would be passed? Stand up the agency by spring 2026.
This sounds like a concept of a plan.
It's ambitious.
Very courageous.
Very courageous, Minister.
So my other question then would be, sorry, and just maybe I missed it. Does this new agency, the Financial Crimes Agency, does it have itself law enforcement powers, or it's just entirely dependent on the RCMP?
We don't know the details yet. So they're calling it an enforcement agency.
Okay, so enforcement powers.
Presumably they're going to have their enforcement powers, but what that's going to look like is still not clear. And I think that's the policy work that's been ongoing. And let me just be clear, if it's enforcement and it's sort of a standalone enforcement, they don't just need police officers. They need all of the things that go into law enforcement investigations, analysts, surveillance, all of that kind of stuff. Covert surveillance, computer stuff. Exactly. It's a lot. So we'll see what that actually looks like in the end. I also want to note, too, though, that this budget also provides $1.7 billion over 4 years to the RCMP to deal with things like transnational organized crime, financial crimes, and money laundering. And the budget says that this investment is actually going to be leveraged to establish this new agency. So I don't know, but if I'm reading the tea leaves of what this says, is that there's this $1.7 billion going to the RCMP right now over the next 4 years to shore up those capabilities. And then presumably once the Financial Crimes Agency is up and running, because that will not be in March, even if the agency is established, it will not be investigating in March. Right. And then slowly pull resources from the RCMP instead of tucking them into the agency. So that's a possible.
The RCMP is going to be okay with that, or are they going to try and? That's the next question. It's one thing. I mean, I don't want to sound. I feel like a conspiracy nut when I say this, but it's one thing to, once you set up an agency and it proves to do its job really well, do you want to then let go of that agency? Maybe they'd be happy to because they're like, hey, this is one less thing we have to worry about, so we can focus on other stuff. But
there's also a scenario in which the agency gets stood up, RCMP reform happens sometime down the road, then the agency gets tucked back in under federal policing, which is actually a scenario that I think would work really well. It's just that we can't protect those resources right now within the existing structure of the RCMP, so it has to be a separate agency. There's a lot of possibilities. I'm trying to be positive and supportive.
Unusual for the pod.
It is very unusual for the pod. But this is something it's so important, and we've needed it for so long. We needed it well before it was flagged in the 2021 Liberal platform. So it's nice to see it back in the budget sphere, and we'll have to just see how it actually shakes out. But listeners, this will not be the last time you hear about the Financial Crimes Agency.
Oh, no, not at all. And it is important, right? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, the financial angle is, and your work is a testimony to this. Without money, malicious actors can't do anything,
No,
right?
exactly.
They can send out some mean tweets or something, but that's
hmm
about it.
But they can't amplify them.
They get out exactly becomes hard. No, I think this is really important, especially on organized crime, violent extremist groups, but even like
Fentanyl
espionage,
trafficking. Mhm.
some of the sabotage stuff that you've been looking into recently, all of
Mhm.
this stuff. So yeah, no, definitely a topic we want to return to again.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that I'll say about that too is, this is when we talk about threat to life, like we're talking about money laundering that's related to things like fentanyl trafficking,
Yes.
which like has a huge threat to life. Yeah, it's not tomorrow that a bomb's going to go off, but like there's been basically bombs in a lot of our communities that have gone off, and you can see the results of that when you walk down the street, even here in Ottawa and Victoria and a whole bunch of different communities. So it's definitely time to deal with this.
Great. Okay. So I thought maybe I'd bring up some of the other national security stuff having gone through. And I mean, to be fair, this came out less than 24 hours ago, and I was hitting Control F quite a lot on a lot of these agencies. But I think the bottom line for the national security agencies, having said that, like, there's not that much in transformation, they're all getting a 2% haircut, even the RCMP, right? They're getting a lot of funding for different things and 1,000 new people, but somehow they're also getting a 2% overall cut. I don't really know what that means or how that works, but that's
The math doesn't entirely math there, but we'll like let it go for now.
something, not to be pejorative, but in the line they talk about girl math. Girl thing, the RCMP, right? But like other agencies, CBSA, the Communications and Security Establishment, CSIS, Department of National Defense, not CAF, as we mentioned earlier, they're all getting a 2% cut. The one exception here that a journalist pointed out to me is the Privy Council Office.
Mhm.
And the Privy Council Office is one of the departments that's been identified as having a 15% cut. And strangely enough, there's a paragraph on that says PCO. This is, of course, one of the, for those who aren't familiar with PCO, this is the, one of the central agencies. It's kind of like the secretariat to cabinet, right? They do a lot of the policy coordination. They kind of follow what cabinet says, right? And so within there, they do have a national security function. And if just thinking back to earlier this year, which seems like 10 million years ago,
Mhm.
but the foreign interference report, a lot of it was focused on why intelligence wasn't flowing well between the departments and agencies that do that function and cabinet. Right. There is a function there. They have made some changes. They have created a national security council where a lot of these national security and issues and intelligence issues are now discussed as a way of informing policy. So there is within that, this National Security Council, what used to be called the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat is now called the Intelligence Assessment Staff. And they seem to be singled out here in terms, and they don't say so specifically, but they say this. It says
Mhm.
PCO will revisit its programs where functions may be overlapping and duplicative with what is delivered by other organizations. For example, this could include working with security partners to rationalize resources dedicated to analyzing intelligence information within government. That seems to be aimed at the intelligence assessment staff, but I can't say for sure. There's other parts there. Of course, there's a foreign and defense policy advisor, and they may have
Mhm.
some analysts in there as well. So it's not clear to me, but I mean, I can see what they're saying. They're like, okay, well, if CSIS has Chinese intelligence analysts, if GAC has people who are assessing China and all these different kinds of
Mhm.
things, does it actually then make sense for, PCO to have that capability if it's already done? And one other thing I would say about PCO is, or the intelligence assessment staff, is they're not constrained by the CSIS Act, right?
Mhm.
Look, let's be honest. CSIS takes a very broad understanding of its mandate, and they can, analysts write about stuff, but like things like the nexus between security and climate change or implications of artificial intelligence, those kinds of broader issues can be looked at by intelligence assessment staff analysts.
Mhm.
And as opposed to like, that's not really the job of CSIS, right? Because it doesn't really fit with their core mandate. So it's not clear to me, but that would be an interesting thing. And by all accounts, having talked to people, around Ottawa, you do hear like Carney is not someone who doesn't like intelligence. He takes briefings. He's apparently like asked some really good questions. The National Security Council is hopping. They are busy as anything. And so for there to be cuts in this space was, if that's in fact what's happening, is surprising.
I wonder, I would be curious about your thoughts on this because we've had the recent transition of ITAC back to the Integrated Threat Assessment Center.
Yes.
So I wonder if that's part of the duplication that we're talking about here, because the threat side would have a slightly broader mandate than the terrorism side would have had back in the day.
So I'm writing about this right now, and
What are you writing about it for, Steph?
a book that I'm editing that you have a chapter in that I'm very delayed writing for, and I apologize to all the other authors. But I'm writing this chapter, and one of the things I've discovered is, yes, they have gone back to the Integrated Threat Assessment Center. I don't think that's the case simply because they seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on protection of members of parliament and political figures and things like this. And they still seem very much, although they can take a much broader understanding of what the threat environment is, they still seem to be very much violent extremism focused. So it's not clear to me that that would be the answer. But we'll see what happens. ITAC was not mentioned in the budget as far as I can tell. But to be fair, I didn't control F. And I think I will after this pod. Maybe next week I'll have to issue a correction.
We could do it in our Christmas corrections.
Exactly.
Festivus.
What we get wrong.
Our Festivus episode.
So that's kind of what I'm taking away, at least on the very specific understanding of what the national security intelligence community is in Canada. Was there anything that stood out for you, maybe on the financial side, FinTrack side, anything like that?
There was a little Easter egg in here that I thought was quite interesting and that I haven't actually
I
seen.
like that we're covering all the holidays in this
all the
podcast.
holidays.
All
You
the
can see that I'm very festive these days, right? It's November. I basically shut it down for the year. But there was this one little thing about review of foreign bank investments. What the budget is proposing is legislative amendments to the Bank Act to enable the review of certain types of investments in Canadian businesses by foreign banks and affiliates for national security risks. So anybody who has heard us talk about the Investment Canada Act knows what this is referencing. The Investment Canada Act allows the Government of Canada to review foreign investments in Canadian businesses for national security risks. Banks were excluded from that process because they're regulated under the Bank Act. And so what this is proposing is to ensure consistency with how other foreign investments are assessed in Canada under the Investment Canada Act. And so I'm not entirely sure what they mean. And I did go back to the Department of Finance with a very tight deadline and ask them to give me some examples of the types of investments that might be covered under this. But it strikes me that this could be a response to the whole Wealth One issue that happened a couple of years ago. And I'll just remind you and the listeners that this is that situation where Minister Freeland raised national security concerns about Wealth One Bank of Canada. She wrote a letter actually alleging foreign interference in the bank and ordering the 3 founding shareholders to sell their shares and divest themselves from the bank. So I think this could be a way to mitigate that kind of thing happening in the future. So that basically if you have foreign investment in the financial sector in Canada, that it gets reviewed like the ICA. But as with many things, maybe I'll be issuing a correction at our Festivus episode about what this is actually about when I finally hear back from the Department of Finance.
Is this something that kind of, like you said, it was an Easter egg? I'm wondering, this is very much a budget that's geared to try and improve investment into Canada and exports and things like that. Is this kind of a spanner in the works for that? Like, if we're trying to encourage investment, is this one? I mean, there's always been that tension, right? The need for investment and the need for national security, and we have struggled to make that balance. This is kind of interesting in the sense that it's something that does seem to counter the larger narrative about increasing foreign investment into Canada.
Yeah, I think that this is really striking a balance, though, of lots of investment into Canada, asterisks, except, our very important strategic sectors and places where we might have had some gaps. Like, this isn't necessarily about no foreign investment in the financial system, in the financial sector, but it is about, like, we're going to review that. We're going to take a close look because we don't want this to be a loophole in our existing system, is my take on that. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's sort of the foreign bank investments piece. Now, Steph, did you have any other things that came up on like the foreign policy side of things?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking that. I did, and I was ranting about it, I think, on Blue Sky. So I think that one of the things that does stick out is this is a government that's saying, look, we need to increase or double our non-American exports in the next decade, right? I think that's the goal that Carney has set for the government. And but at the same time, they're cutting 15% from global affairs. And that is harsh, right? And so there's a couple of things that kind of stood out. It says that one of the things it's going to target is global health programming. And certainly development in this budget is just taking a punch to the throat. They've cut $2.7 billion from development, which is a lot. And they're saying they want to return it to pre-pandemic funding levels. But, this is a time when we've seen the United States pull back on all of its development funding, right? USAID has died, or USAID. And it's kind of shocking to see this. I mean, $2.7 billion is not a ton of money. Yes, it's savings here and there and everything, but what are we getting for that? And I think development people get a little cagey when you try to link development to security. And I 100% get that argument. So I just want to be very clear that I'm aware of that. But in this, to me, we shouldn't look at development as separate from security, right? I think we should see it as security. If, we have a global polio outbreak because our expertise is no longer there and these programs are no longer being funded, I think that's quite tragic and could potentially lead to security problems down the road, right? When these societies are sick, they're going to have problems, and those problems can turn into security issues that affect the regions, can affect us globally. So I think this is something that is to be regretted. And, again, like international assistance or international development, I think it's mentioned 1 to 2 times in the budget. Again, RCMP mentioned 32 times. So I think that sucks. If I'm just perfectly honest with you, yes, we have the global health programming and expertise. They almost seem to be treating it as it's disproportionate in terms of our expertise, which is just really odd. They're saying, oh, well, we're disproportionately, doing this relative to other countries. I'm like, yeah, because we're good at it. And we've built this up really since Harper, right? If you think of the maternal health stuff that he put in.
That it's hard to say that it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't get. This is something we should be doubling down on.
I actually think this is maybe like that soft power people talk about.
Yeah, and soft power goes hand in hand with hard power. Again, I understand the complications of this and people don't want to securitize development. I 100% get that, but that's the reality of it. And I don't think we should be thinking of these things separately. And to me, it's tragic that, as we're spending $84 billion on like half that $2.7 billion that could have gone to stopping people from getting easily preventable diseases seems to be being cut. And yeah, that sucks. And that seems to be where I think a lot of the cuts at global affairs is going to be, is really on the development side. They also identify, for example, bilateral development programs, which are going to be refined and adjusted. And yeah, and then there's the other thing here is where there is new funding for global affairs, it is largely on the trade and export side. And it was a little confusing to me because there's parts of the budget that talk about reducing duplication in the Trade Commissioner Service as a way to cut. But then it talks about creating a strategic exports office, right? Which is going to work with the Trade Commissioner's office. I suppose. I'm not entirely sure. They're going to enhance something called Can Export, which is, to be fair, that's more about trying to get small, medium enterprises here in Canada to export their goods abroad and finding ways to help them do that. They talk about the Innovation Partnership Program and the Canadian Technology Accelerator. I'm unfamiliar with those programs, but that's effectively where, if there's any new funding, I think that's effectively where it's going. And then the final thing I would note in the budget is, it doesn't really talk about regions other than the Indo-Pacific and Europe. And there's a couple things I would note here. Firstly, the budget does not use the term Indo-Pacific strategy, which is interesting, right? Maybe there's a perception that this was a Trudeau era initiative. And so it talks about the Indo-Pacific quite a bit, and it uses that language, but it doesn't talk about the strategy. Now, that's okay in the sense that strategy is funded for another 3 years. There's still another 3 years to go on that Indo-Pacific strategy, so that funding is protected. Beyond that, we don't know. And then it also, the real kind of love child, I would say, is Europe, right? This is a very much budget that seems to be looking into Europe. It does actually look at some of the models that were created during the Indo-Pacific strategy in terms of enhancing our presence, creating chambers of commerce and things like that. They're looking at doing that in Europe. The final thing I'll add here, though, which is maybe one bright spot, is that they're looking at having Canada join Eurovision, which is amazing. I want to do a full podcast on this. You
have to walk me through this because I am only vaguely familiar about what Eurovision is.
Okay, so Eurovision is a song competition. So each year, every country in Eurovision, which is like pretty much all the European countries and a lot of non-European countries like Central Asian, Russia used to be in it, got kicked out after its invasion of Ukraine. Israel's in it, Australia's in it. So hey, why not us? And
Okay, wait a second. Did
Yeah.
Celine Dion not win Eurovision for France at one point?
for Switzerland,
What?
I think it was Switzerland. She competed for Switzerland. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
So I mean, I say we bring her back. But the thing is, too, you have to write an original song. But like the real kind of success story out of Eurovision is probably ABBA. ABBA, right? ABBA wrote songs. I think Waterloo was one of their songs. Anyways, there's also a movie with Will Ferrell, which highly recommended. Like if you haven't seen it, just really fantastic. And it kind of gets into the pageantry that is Eurovision. And I lived in Europe for 10 years. So yes, I am a huge Eurovision fan. One year I had to dress up as Moldova. I didn't know anything about Moldova, but man, I learned so I could participate in Eurovision. And Moldova did not do well, but that's okay. I was invited to the party very last minute. But yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this, and like we can talk about this and why I don't think Canada would do well, but there's kind of voting blocks, right? The Eastern European countries all vote for each other. There was a very famous host of Eurovision. He was British, and his name was Terry Wogan, and he would always probably partake in too many alcoholic beverages during the night, and he would say things like, "We won the Cold War but lost the Eurovision." The Central European states would effectively just vote for each other. And anyways, to that point, so it's hard for Western European countries now to win in Eurovision. But that being said, I think if we joined, we could do a voting bloc, perhaps with the UK and Australia and maybe other countries, but we'll see. The thing is with joining this is, it seems silly, but I think it makes a lot of sense. If you want Europe to think Canada, you got to get in front of Europe.
Yeah.
And Eurovision is one of the most watched things in Europe. It is kind of like their musical Super Bowl. I use Super Bowl quite a lot during this conversation, but it's the truth. And so I actually think it's quite clever as a kind of soft power. I guess, I mean, it makes me sad. Okay, yeah, well, a polio outbreak, but yeah, we're going to have some great music come out of this and it's a real cheese. But I think as like a way of getting in front of Europe, that this is an interesting strategy for the Carney government to take.
Yeah, that's a real mixed bag, right? Polio with the side of Eurovision. But
the side of Eurovision it should be the name of this pod, but that's where we're going. So, and so one last thing I would notice is Canada's National Public Alert System is going to get, I think, $55 million to improve. And that's something I would actually really like to happen. It is, if you look at Japan, they have a public alert system. You can pick which language. I think they offer the service in 6 different languages. Right now, we only do it obviously in English and French. I think we could modernize that system. And I think given the amount of climate-related crises that we're having and other security issues, I think it could be something that could be enhanced in the future. So that's my last kind of note on this. But maybe there'll be more to talk about in the coming weeks.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So I think we can end it there, and maybe I'll just put a little bug in the ear of our listeners that if you have grievances that you would like us to air or talk about during our Festivus episode, you can hit us up in the comments or on any of our social media platforms. And then we will be hopefully back at least one more time before the Festivus episode, but we can't make any promises. We're still scheduling guests and figuring out our schedules. But that Christmas episode, that Festivus episode, we're planning to do video on. So we're going to brush our hair. We're going to look festive. We might have one of those alcoholic beverages Steph was just talking about. And we might have a good time at it.
Fantastic. I don't. We need to workshop the name, Jess. Is it Festivus or like National Security Festival? Like we call it Nats Festivus.
NatSec Fest.
That rolls off the tongue. We'll
workshop it. Well, thanks, Steph.
Yeah, this is a fun conversation. And once again, I would remind our listeners, if you do like this podcast, if you find it useful, please rate and review. The more ratings and reviews that we have, the easier it is for other people to find us. And of course, we just kind of like talking to each other. But honestly, if we can help shape policy in any way, shape, or form, if nothing else, I can put it in my HR file, which would be great for promotion.
Have a good one, Steph.
Cheers.